I thought my wife gave birth prematurely, but it turns out the child is not mine. Nearly 12 years of ups and downs, joys and sorrows, memories, and now all that remains are pain, hatred, and resentment. Today, I received the results of the DNA test for one of my twin children. I told myself to calmly accept everything because there's nothing left to lose, but my emotions are filled with worry and confusion. When I read the conclusion that there's a 99.99% blood relationship between the child and me, my eyes welled up with tears, and I choked back sobs, almost crying like when I heard the child cry when they were born several years ago. I let out a deep sigh, feeling much lighter after days of anguish. I am 43 years old, and my wife is 35. We got married at the end of 2011 and had trouble conceiving. My health is relatively normal, but my wife's health is a bit weak, with occasional minor illnesses, but she's resilient. In the first few years of our marriage, she got pregnant twice, but the first pregnancy ended in a miscarriage after 3 months, and the second one ended in a miscarriage at about 4 months. Fast forward to 2018, my wife became pregnant again. We were overjoyed and took extra care, even restricting her activities to protect the pregnancy. At about 3 months into the pregnancy, during the second ultrasound, the doctor told us there was another baby's heartbeat, and our joy multiplied. However, happiness in life often comes with worries. Around the 5th or 6th month of pregnancy, the doctor diagnosed my wife with twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, where one baby was growing well, but the other was not doing well. We followed the doctor's advice, focused on nutrition, and continued the pregnancy. Around the middle of the 7th month, the poorly developing baby's condition didn't improve. My wife had to be hospitalized for more than 3 weeks, and eventually, the doctor predicted a grim outcome. I had to make arrangements to transfer my wife to a different hospital, and I waited anxiously for updates, visiting the hospital to attend appointments and receive guidance. After an ultrasound, the doctor told us that there was a high chance that one baby had Down syndrome, and the other had a facial deformity, lacking a nose, and immediate surgery was needed. At this point, the pregnancy had reached about 32 weeks. After leaving the ultrasound room, my wife cried like rain, and I was completely devastated, feeling confused. After taking my wife to the operating room, I stood there in a daze, my emotions in turmoil, telling myself that there might still be some hope left. After a few hours of waiting and anticipation, we received news that one of the twins, a healthy baby weighing 2.2 kilograms, was stable and breathing weakly on their own. They were moved to a recovery room, while the other, a tiny baby weighing just 1 kg, had to stay in an incubator. The next morning, the larger baby and my wife were brought out. Seeing the baby cry loudly, I felt an overwhelming happiness as a father, and tears welled up in my eyes. The other baby was later transferred to a special care unit after 2 weeks, following the hospital's kangaroo care program. After nearly 7 years of waiting and uncertainty, my wife and I finally had 2 children. Although they were not the healthiest and had developmental issues, I felt that life was quite beautiful, and I was very content with what we had. For almost 12 years of our life together, I was the primary breadwinner in the family, with a regular job and income that was just enough to cover our expenses, with no surplus. My wife primarily took care of the household. Due to her poor health, she tried working in an industrial zone for a few months, but couldn't keep up with the physical demands, so she had to quit. She also attempted a few self-employment ventures like running a home-based hair salon, but didn't find success. I didn't have high expectations for her abilities and believed that, as a man, I should shoulder the burden of providing for the family. Given her health issues, I thought it was best for her to focus on being a homemaker, especially with our children to care for. The pressure from our 2 growing children increased over time, both of them being active and slow in their development. The younger child suffered from severe malnutrition due to poor nutrient absorption. Taking care of them became increasingly challenging, and the expenses for our 2 children were significant compared to my income. My wife grew more stressed and irritable, unlike her earlier self. To alleviate some of the tensions, I would often send the children to my in-laws while I went to work, and I repeated this arrangement several times. In early September 2022, we had another conflict, a typical mother-in-law and daughter-in-law dispute, and I tried to mediate but couldn't resolve it. My wife decided to take the two children to her parents' home. I was determined to keep the older child with me because I had found a suitable school for them. So, my wife took the younger child to her parents' home. I continued to send money to support my wife in caring for the child, although it wasn't a substantial amount. Honestly, I didn't want to send more money. I wanted my wife to face the challenges of earning a living, finding a job, and becoming a better person in the process. I hoped that this would bring us closer together and make her more involved in our shared responsibilities. After about a month, I heard my wife say that if the child didn't go to school, they would stay at her parents' home while she continued her work selling nutritional supplements in the countryside. Around the new year, my wife said she wanted to bring the older child back home for the new year because she missed them. I sent her money to buy clothes for the kids. I felt a glimmer of hope that our life might return to normal. On the first day of the new year, I visited my wife's place and brought the older child back with me. My wife seemed perfectly fine, and our relationship was back to normal. After celebrating the new year together, I took the older child back to Los Angeles for them to continue their education. About 10 days later, I realized it was a holiday and tried to contact my wife for the child to visit her, but I couldn't reach her. I even playfully teased her, saying, "Do you have a new boyfriend?" She replied, "Are you crazy? Who wants someone with a husband and 2 kids?" I read her response and chuckled. In reality, I was focused on my work, not paying much attention to matters of the heart. That's just how I am. When I'm out, I don't even bother looking at women, whether they're slim or curvy. My workload suddenly increased after the new year. I discussed with my wife the idea of having her take care of the older child, let them continue their education in the countryside, while I focused on earning more money. I suggested that she quit her current job because it didn't pay much, and instead, she could spend time caring for our child. I promised to send more money. So we decided on this plan, and I took the older child back to be with my wife at her parents' home. I returned to Los Angeles to continue making a living and would visit my wife and child whenever I had a few free days. On April 1st, 2023, my wife showed me her pregnancy checkup results, delivering the joyful news that our family was soon to have a new member. She was already 3 months pregnant. I was overjoyed and told her that with the addition of another child, I would work even harder, and she could focus on taking care of the children. In early July 2023, I suggested that my wife bring the children back home for the summer to ease tensions between our daughter-in-law and my mother. My wife and her mother, along with our younger child and 2 other children, came to visit. My mother noticed the pregnancy belly and was completely surprised. I wanted to surprise my mother, so I didn't inform her in advance. After about a week of visiting, my wife took the children back to the countryside. In early August 2023, my wife messaged me, asking for money to buy some baby supplies in preparation for the birth. I replied, "It's still too early." The pregnancy checkup from the other day said the due date was in early November, and even if the baby arrived a bit earlier, it would still be in October. One day in mid-August 2023, I was at work in another city when my wife called in the afternoon, saying she had been admitted to the hospital. The doctor told her that the baby's heart was weak, so they needed to perform a cesarean section immediately. I was extremely worried. About 3 hours later, around dusk, my sister-in-law called me and said the baby had been born, and the mother was temporarily in the recovery room. I asked how much the baby weighed, and she said 2.7 kilograms. I was deeply concerned. I thought the baby was born too early, small, and fragile like our 2 older twin children. I believed that the baby must be in the neonatal intensive care unit and couldn't be taken out yet. I felt uneasy and asked for the night off from work. My wife's sister-in-law took my place and called me, saying, "Congratulations on becoming a father again," and showed me a video call of the baby crying. After turning off the machine, I was in turmoil, doing some mental calculations, feeling that something was very unusual and irrational. According to my calculations, at over 28 weeks of pregnancy, the baby would be very weak and difficult to keep. Even if we managed to keep the baby, there was no way they should be out of the intensive care unit so soon. I went online to research the weight of newborns, and I found that babies at weeks 28 to 29 weigh only around 1.5 kilograms, while a baby weighing 2.7 kilograms should be at least 36 weeks along if they're developing properly. My world collapsed, and I felt numb. After finishing my work that evening and boarding a bus back to Los Angeles, I quickly booked a ticket to my hometown. Around noon, when the bus reached the terminal, I didn't go home but went straight to the hospital without any prior communication. I asked a few nurses for the patient's name and was directed to the room. In the room, my sister-in-law was on duty. My wife and the baby were lying there. I didn't know what to say, so I just mumbled. Then I blurted out to my wife, "When you gave birth, how many weeks did the doctor say the baby was?" My wife didn't look at me directly and replied hesitantly, "Almost 29 weeks." I noticed a smile on the faces of the people in the room. I went downstairs to the hospital lobby, sat there for a while, and then returned to the room. When my sister-in-law left, the room was left with just my wife, me, and the baby. I said, "Is there something you want to tell me?" My wife remained silent. I screamed in agony, desperately searching for an answer. "Why aren't you saying anything, not responding to any questions?" I messed up. "There's nothing more to say," my wife replied. "Maybe this story is too long, and I'm not good with words or storytelling. I tend to be more technical and straightforward, and I'm not a very emotional person. My decisions after leaving the hospital were to be honest with everyone around me, to be straightforward with my mother-in-law, and to bring my 2 children back to Los Angeles to raise and care for them. I'm in the process of filing for divorce now, feeling confused. Right now, I'm only living for my children.